Welcome to Waterside Chat. Tom Sadler talks with guests who depend on healthy oceans and fisheries for their recreation and livelihoods. And now, let's get started.
Well, welcome to today's Waterside Chat. I'm your host, Tom Sadler, the CEO of the Marine Fish Conservation Network, and I am delighted to be joined today by Meredith Moore. Meredith is Ocean Conservancy's Senior Director of Fish Conservation and a member of our network policy council. We'll be learning about Meredith, Ocean Conservancy, her experience with the network, and most importantly, the Magnuson Stevens Act and what it means to her. So without further ado, welcome, Meredith.
Thank you, Tom. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we are delighted to have you. So we'll get started here with who Meredith is. And, give me a little background. Where were you born and raised? Where did you go to school? And then we'll start talking a little bit about how you came to this wonderful ocean world.
Yes. So I was born in Huntsville, Alabama, so North Alabama.
I know it.
And I spent basically was there up until went off to college at University of Georgia. And then I did my grad school up in University of Maryland. And that kind of like sucked me into the DC orbit, and I've never left since. So that's how I got into doing, once you're in the gravity well of DC politics, I think it's sometimes hard to leave. And I'm one of those ones who's landed and stayed. So that's sort of my crash course. I grew up going down to the Gulf Coast every summer. So the ocean was always a big part of the way we identified and the way we spent our time heading down to the beach, going out fishing on charter boats or those sorts of things. I feel like I contributed to depleting some fish populations down there myself. With
you and Teresa Labriola.
That's right. The amount of seafood that I consumed, the amount of Gulf shrimp I alone feel like I've been responsible for. So grew up eating U.S. domestic caught seafood, but you probably know this about me. I took a weird circuitous route to getting to fisheries because my undergrad and grad school work was all physics and astronomy. So I was doing like telescope observation and stuff before I found my way into environmental and like marine policy work. And that it's always funny when someone like a young person asks me for career advice for how to get into this field. And I'm like, well, don't do it the way I did it. It doesn't make any sense.
But I would argue, Meredith, that in fact, probably the best way to get into it is the way you did, given how accomplished you are in this world and how much we all rely on you for your wisdom and experience, and which we'll learn more about. So how did you wind up over at Ocean Conservancy?
Yeah, so during grad school, I was like I said, I was doing actual astronomy, and it was during a period of time where people were using more and more satellites to observe like other planets and that sort of thing. And so I started doing a bunch of work. I kind of cross-departmented my way in the university over to the Department of Meteorology because that's where the people know how to use satellites. And so I was doing all this satellite work and basically just sitting there and like you train on Earth observation. So every Earth observation I was looking at, it was basically like blah, 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 math equals climate change. So
I love that framing, right? Blah, 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 math, climate change.
Yeah, exactly. So I was sitting there just like everything I was learning, I was like, oh, ... and climate change. And so I was like, I'm just not going to be satisfied doing an academic career that's looking and thinking about stuff that it's all very important stuff, but to me, it wasn't going to have the impact about the thing I was becoming more and more invested in trying to be a part of the solution to. And so I started to go rogue in grad school. I took a science journalism class, and that like required my advisors to all call me into a meeting and be like, "What are you doing? Why are you taking classes in two different departments that have nothing to do with what you're supposed to be doing?" And so I quit after my master's. So I finished my master's. I took my quals, passed my quals. They were like, "All right, head into your academic career for astronomy." And I was like, "No, actually, I'm going to go do weirder stuff." And so I left and
Very
I
awesome.
started, my first job was at the Union of Concerned Scientists.
Uh-huh.
They think they do work to sort of like rehabilitate um, former physicists to make us
Uh-huh.
like capable of maintaining eye contact and like being not just academic nonsense people. And so my job there was looking into political interference in science, like science-based policy, because a lot of our federal laws look at using the best scientific information available to set good policy and like bringing that expertise to the policy sphere. And so I did a lot of different types of work, lots of different laws. And it just happened that like I kind of ended up circling around and gravitating towards a lot of those instances that had to do with either fish or ocean species. And then from there, I sort of hopscotched my way through a few different ENGOs that worked on ocean stuff, including few charitable trusts. And then that was the job I had before I came to Ocean Conservancy. And I came to OC to work, to lead our fisheries work here. But I've probably been doing Magnuson related work for 15 or more years now. So I feel like I've earned it at this point, but for a long time it was like, what's this astronomer doing fisheries stuff doing here? I used to joke with folks that like when I first started, I really didn't know what fish particularly were, but I could like read the scientific papers because of the math in them. And I was like, I guess, sure, we can pretend these are fish. I understand what the modeling is saying. But since then, I have learned quite a bit more about fish.
For
So,
sure. Um, so there's so much there that I want to jump on. It's fascinating to me that you came from a very interesting perspective to um, come to Ocean's work. And what attracted you to the to OC?
yeah. The thing that I love about, well, I'll kind of combine this because one of the things
Okay,
that attracted to me about OC is the thing that attracted to me to working in fisheries. And Ocean
right.
Conservancy is a place where you can really do important work on fisheries. So it's kind of a paired question. I love working in fisheries because it is a place where human interests and environmental interests align really well.
Hmm.
So you can do work in fisheries about, trying to, conserve fish stocks so that we have more abundant species. And the reasons that you do that are not just to have some sort of pristine wild ecosystem, although I'm a big fan of wild ecosystems, but it's also so that people can benefit from these resources and can feed themselves and each other, and can have businesses and industry. And so the thing that I really like about working in fisheries is finding those pragmatic solutions that actually work for people, but also really work for the environment. And I like how those align. And so that sort of like pragmatic approach is really, I think, the way that Ocean Conservancy is known for, and certainly
Hmm.
the way my program operates. We
Hmm.
are looking for solutions alongside fishing partners and others. Like we want to find something that works for the people and the environment. And that is, I think, the magic of working in fisheries. There's a lot of environmental work that's extremely important, but it's often very conflict ridden, because like when you're dealing with a species where there are only like 200 left or something, the only thing you can really tell people is no.
Right.
Fisheries is a lot of telling people yes, comma, with some, let's put some bounds around it. But yes, we can go fishing. Yes, we can restore these ecosystems. Yes, we can help you run a business by, sharing this public resource. So that's really why I like working in fisheries and what I think we're able to do at Ocean Conservancy.
So is it fair to say then, based on what you just said, is that if you look at the foundational law, the Magnuson Stevens Act, that is as a reflection of what you just said, is that it's a pragmatic approach to allowing people to actually get to yes, but it's yes, but here are some sideboards.
Yeah,
Um,
I think
Go
that's
ahead.
exactly right. Yeah, I think that's right. That's really, I think, but it has had to evolve over time to get to that point. But like when I look at Magnuson, I think too, it's like this is gonna get a little poetic, so
You're
just bear
great.
with me.
Love it.
Like when I think about what we're trying to do with Magnuson, it's really optimistic,
Hmm.
fundamentally, because it is about looking at a wild ecosystem and saying, we can get this right. Like we can get it, we can manage our impact on it and also benefit from it. Like fisheries are the only large scale wild food source that humans depend upon
Hmm.
anymore. Everything else is farmed, raised, agriculture, etc. Nothing wrong with those things, but like this is a wild capture fishery. Like we benefit when the ecosystem benefits. And so Magnuson is about saying, okay, how do we find that sweet spot? How do we figure out using the science, using what we learn from people who are out on the water, like bringing all of that together. How do we get that balance right? How do we live somewhat gently on top of that ecosystem so that it can still be a wild and healthy ecosystem, but still, go fishing. So I think that's really what Magnuson is trying to do. It certainly has changed over time to get closer to that. It probably needs to keep changing over time to get closer to that, certainly as both the way we fish and the way the ecosystems are responding keeps changing. But it's a real chance to do it right. And I think that's what gets me out of bed every day. Is like every day it's another chance to like get it a little bit better and make a real difference in both people's lives and our ocean's life.
Um, so that talks to me about the why this all matters.
Yeah.
You guys just released a report, drifting off course, which I want to come back to for a second, but because I have someone who is so invested in the act itself. Um, can you sort of walk me through we're celebrating 50 years of Magnuson, but there are and we're celebrating 30 years of the Marine Fish Conservation Network. And one of those elements really came from the first reauthorization of
Mm,
Magnuson. So if you can, take us through the arc of where Magnuson went, how it evolved, and where it is today, because I do want to come back to the drifting off course report and
right.
also um, talk about the successes. But I'm going to take advantage of someone who knows this so well to say, give me a bit of a history lesson here, if you will.
Yeah, happy to do so. And I just want to recognize I'm resting on the shoulders of many giants who came
Hmm.
before me to do these reauthorizations and to make this law into how it is. So really appreciate all of the work from those folks and then all of the, members of Congress, all the fishermen involved in all these things. But all right, 50 years ago, where were we? It's actually the era where a lot of environmental laws are being passed. So you're in the Nixon era. You've got a lot of like Clean Air, Clean Water Act. Many of those
Hmm.
are all being passed at the same time. The major issue that people were facing in fisheries at the time was concerns about, there was overfishing out there, but you're in a period of time where our fisheries are still especially domestically, building up their fleets. So we didn't have
Hmm.
all of the boats built or anything by that point in time. But what was really happening was foreign vessels from
Hmm.
Russia, mostly, but other countries as well, were coming really close into US waters and catching our fish. And so there are these perhaps apocryphal stories, but like stories of, Warren Magnuson and Senator Stevens and others like flying home and looking out and seeing these large Russian trawlers taking all of our fish. And so the original version of Magnuson was kind of an Americanization effort. It certainly reflected concerns about we need to not overfish these stocks, but it was largely about establishing the exclusive economic zone of the United States. So that takes our federal waters out to 200 nautical miles. So sort of us being like, all right, this is ours. We're going to fish in this area, and we're going to catch these fish, and we're going to keep the foreign vessels out, and we're going to make this an American thing. So that was relatively successful. I think the foreign fleets were removed. But then what we did was we turned around, then built a lot of boats and got really good at fishing. So we kind of then became our own worst enemy. And the US fleets then overfished many, many of our stocks. And so when we were heading into the 1990s, many of our fish stocks were like kind of in free fall due to overfishing pressure. We just got too good at catching fish, and there were too many folks out there doing it too well. And so then what you get is the original like reauthorization. That's what it's called when we want to fully redo a law, and then like Congress says, all right, go out and keep doing this thing. We authorize these things to keep going. So the first reauthorization was really trying to address some of those core sustainability issues that we were starting to see. How do we reduce or eliminate overfishing? How do we start rebuilding stocks that have been like substantially depleted by this? And so that's where you get these first few like real changes looking in. You have to rebuild stocks. We can't leave them at depleted states for a while because that hurts fishing access and it hurts the ability for people to run businesses. And you have to end overfishing immediately. None of this like, well, we'll get to it later, because it's always easier to make a hard decision later than it is to make a hard decision now. And to end overfishing and rebuild stocks, you have to make pretty substantial cuts usually into the access that people have, because the way that a fish stock rebuilds is you've got to lay off it long enough that it can start to come back, and then you have to stay off of it while it starts rebuilding that reproductive capacity. So that was really the first reauthorization. Things got better, but not as good as we wanted after that. And so we were still struggling to rebuild many stocks. There were still issues with habitat degradation. There were still issues with overfishing persisting. And so then there was another reauthorization, and that was in 2006 was the second major reauthorization. There have been other like bills here and there that have tweaked parts of Magnuson, but these are the real formative changes to the law. And 2006 is where we brought in, I say we, I wasn't there, where they brought in like some real core science-based management approaches to the law. So that is when they said every fish stock needs to have an annual catch limit and accountability measures in place. This approach had been sort of pioneered by the Alaskan fisheries. So they had been using annual catch limits and such for a while. But this sort of spread them out to all of the major fish stocks. It took them several years to get these in place for everything. But it said, we're going to use the best science that we have. We're going to do stock assessments. We're going to collect all this data. We're going to use it using scientific advisors and the council process to say, like, hey, we're going to when you get to this amount, you should not be fishing after that. And if you exceed that amount, then an accountability measure comes in place. Maybe you have to fish less next year or something like that. And that was like really putting some teeth into the don't overfish, please rebuild your stocks thing. So those are really some of the core fundamental changes that happened. But I do want to recognize a couple other really unique things about the law, if I can.
Sure, absolutely.
Which is one, the council process. So from the get-go, they established these things called the Regional Fishery Management Councils. There are 8 of them around the country. And what they are is they are bodies made up of state managers, federal managers, and people who are appointed by nominated by their governor and then appointed by the Secretary of Commerce. Most of those folks come from the fishing industry or from recreational fishing. So it's truly like putting some of those people right at the table. And what the councils do is they help kind of customize the way that all these pieces of the law that I said come down. This is sort of the more bottom-up approach.
Mm-hmm,
So it's like the
mm-hmm.
people in the regions coming together to figure out for their specific fisheries, how do they want to meet those requirements? And so then they develop and plan fishery management plans for their various stocks, which then get implemented by the National Marine Fisheries Service. And so there's some pros and cons to the council process. I won't say it's been perfect, but it does give at least some people who are very directly invested in the fishery a voice. There are real issues about who doesn't get that voice, which we can get into later, and is actually part of our report. But it is an interesting. Nowhere else in the world does it quite like us. It was a unique approach, and I don't think there's any natural resource in the U.S. that we manage this way. So it's another unique thing about fisheries that we just do it weird.
Right. Well, no, I mean, the only thing that sort of jumps into my mind is like the flyways for migratory birds. Has some of that, the joint ventures and the National Fish Habitat partnerships on the terrestrial side, have some of that, but I think they learned from Magnuson. I mean, the whole notion of the council process on paper makes great sense.
Sure.
But I think, as we will hear from you in a bit, that maybe it's not, there's things that could be polished in there.
Could be better. Yeah.
Could be better. So let me jump back for a sec to the network. When did you first get involved in the network?
You told me you were going to ask me this, and I could not remember. So
let me give you perspective here.
I've
been working for the network for 10 years.
Okay, I want to say 10 years because I think I joined when I came over to Ocean Conservancy. I think that's when I joined the Policy Council. So I think they're approximately concurrent. But I will say, like, I've been doing this long enough that I feel like the overlaps with you all probably happened even before I managed to get on the Policy Council.
For sure. So the network, here's my weaving back into so you've got the councils, and then you have the Marine Fish Conservation Network, which has its own policy council.
Right.
Give me your view of how the network works, how well it works, how that council process helps bring disparate voices to the table.
Well, you stole part of the answer, which is that it helps bring disparate voices to a table. I mean, I think one of the unique things that MFCN does is that it has these forums like the Policy Council where commercial, recreational, some like distributors or others, and sometimes the dreaded ENGOs can get a seat at the table together to talk about some of the most challenging things that are facing fisheries management right now and try to co-develop what some solutions or path forwards to, some pragmatic and iterative improvements to those things could be. And it also really helps all of us get out of our bubbles. There's a lot of good geographic distribution as well. Everyone, I think, treats each other with a huge amount of respect, which is not always like when you have people with differing views, it can be difficult sometimes to maintain that level of mutual respect. But I think everyone has like immense mutual respect and understanding of the positions everyone's coming from. And you just learn a lot hearing about the priorities that other people have. So I think it's really served some valuable roles there.
Well, thank you. That's, that has been, I was exposed to the network 20 years ago and then wound up coming over here. And that was the thing that was the most attractive to me is because it's very easy to get siloed. And,
Yeah.
if you work for I work for NGOs, and you get very siloed into your policy and blah, blah, blah. And you hope you're listening to other voices, but if you've got a round table, if you will, that creates that space and the opportunity, and frankly, from my point of view, from leading the network, our most recent policy council uh, meeting was a fine example. It was a very engaged conversations going around. Hey, how do we address some of this stuff, and what's going on? And the sharing of information was particularly useful.
Mm-hmm.
So, I like to think that having strong voices on the policy council is very useful to come up with durable and um, strong solutions to things, which again falls into the framework of what we're talking about um, with the Magnuson Stevens Act. Um, let's go back to you talk, especially because of your background. You talk about science-based management as sort of the watershed moment in 2006. You also made a passing reference to the fact that your intrigue into this world was part of the politics. So one of the questions is how do you defend science when it becomes politically inconvenient?
Yeah. What a easy question to answer.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, here's so
but it's
Magnuson
but
is
it's a challenge, right?
it's
I mean,
important.
I don't mean to interrupt, but we live in a world where people don't want to be, quote, inconvenienced by politics, but
Sure.
yet what dominates the news cycle? I'm sure you've seen this more as I have in the last 5 or 6, 10 years, maybe, but politics isn't everything we talk about now. So I'm
Yes.
sorry, I've interrupted, but I'm really curious. I mean, you work in an organization that has a great reputation for being pragmatic, science oriented, et cetera, et cetera. But so it must be harder for you sometimes.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for those compliments. Yeah. So here's where should I start? In fisheries, the way that our management system currently works is that there is always this huge tension between wanting to catch more fish because catching more fish gives people a chance to go out and either do some more charter trips or land some more to sell at a fish market or those sorts of things. And the thing that's put in opposition to that is the science, because
Hmm.
the science is the thing that goes out, brings together the catch data that we've collected, the surveys that have happened, the modeling and everything that we have now, puts all of that into a stock assessment, sort of turns a very complicated crank and comes out with like, here's what we think is a sustainable amount for you to catch. Um, and that is a very complex process with a lot of uncertainties built in because it's science. And the easiest way in fisheries to get more fish often is to say the science is bad.
Hmm.
And there's another inherent problem with kind of the different perspectives that fisheries science has versus what a an angler or a fisherman would have, which is that people who fish know an incredible amount about the places they fish, the fish that they're targeting. They're very, very good at finding those fish.
Right,
If they weren't, they wouldn't be in the business for very
right.
long. And so what you have is you have like experts in finding exactly where the fish are and catching as many of them as possible. That's not what science is trying to do. Science isn't trying to go out and find with a survey the most number of fish. It's trying to understand how many fish there are total out there so that we can set limits on it. And so you get these differing perspectives too, where you're often hearing fishermen say, oh my God, there's so many fish out there, I can't get away from them. And science is saying, like the science stock assessments are saying, like, actually, this stock is still rebuilding or the population is starting to decline and we need to bring some precaution into that. So you have that constant tension. And it's very easy to like vilify the science. You see this happening a lot. If a stock assessment comes out a way that people don't like, the councils may say, do it again, try new numbers. There's a lot of pressure on particularly recreational data because it's very hard to collect that data, but no one likes to say this, but we do have, I think, probably one of the best recreational data collection systems in the world. It can get a lot better.
Sure.
But it's like we've invested heavily in those things to do the science-based management. But you get that real tension. The way it's supposed to feel protected, but this is always the tension, is that we have these advisory bodies for the councils called the scientific and statistical committees, and they're supposed to legally in the law, they provide a fishing level recommendation and the councils cannot exceed that. And so that's sort of the boundary. But what you see is a lot of political bleed on who's on the SSCs, the science,
Right.
like, because the councils choose who's on there. And those scientists are also under an incredible amount of pressure. I am in no way disparaging their independence or anything, but it is a political system that they exist in, and there's a lot of pressures on them. And then they also have to deal with like, maybe we missed some surveys. Maybe it's been a long time since we've done some of this data. There's a lot of uncertainty and they have to make those decisions, and those are really hard decisions to make. And so that's really where the science to management crux happens, and that is where a lot of tension and fighting happens in fisheries.
So recognizing all that,
Yeah.
right? And if you were queen for the day, how would you advise people to make that balance, right?
Right.
You've got science on one side, you've got it, and science is a reality, right?
Yeah.
It's a reality. It's a numbers. It's a reality.
Yeah.
But increasingly, and in 1976, there was a political reality. Offshore boats were stealing, my words, stealing our fish. Right?
Sure.
And Ted Stevens said, no mas. That politics worked in domestic fisheries' favor.
Right.
Today, it's a challenge when, as you have said, the science doesn't say what someone wants. I mean, we have friends, and I'm not going to name check people, but I'm really, what's Meredith's best advice to people when they look at the science and say, hey, you got to think about it this way. And what is that way? And I'm not trying to really put you on the spot so you can back away, but I'd love to get your view.
Yeah, I think I'm going to take an oblique approach to your question. Sure. Here's what I think. The current situation that we're in with fisheries management is that I think we have pushed, for almost every stock, I think we've pushed as close to essentially an overfishing limit as we possibly can because of that tension between the science and the policy. We are fishing at kind of a maximum amount on as many stocks as we can all at the same time. That means that we've sort of reduced any kind of buffer or precaution almost across the board, which means that as soon as anything goes wrong, either a heat wave or It doesn't even have to be like an environmental cause. It could be a flood of imports from another country or something. Then we are at our most vulnerable because we've pushed everything to those limits. Um, all of that is going to become even worse as climate change disrupts our ecosystems, where most species are going to decline. Some species will do better, and we should figure out ways to sustainably fish those, but most are going to be in decline. There are estimates that the overall productivity of fisheries will decline globally like by 4 or 5%, which doesn't sound like that much until you're trying to feed your family and you've got a 4 or 5% decline, which can be pretty substantial. So um, I guess there are a few concepts in fisheries management that we entirely ignore that would help us here. One of them is in most instances, we are fishing at what is often called maximum sustainable yield, which is we take every fish out that we possibly can that doesn't cause a long-term depletion. But that means that we aren't controlling the economic market and we aren't thinking about the other benefits that having abundant fisheries could bring to people. So there are often, and I'm kind of doing a deep dive here, but there are other ways to think about how much we want to take each year. One of them is sometimes called maximum economic yield, which is how do we maximize the economic benefit of these fisheries? And quite often, that is a lower amount of catch than a maximum sustainable yield, because then you have more control over the price you're getting at the dock. And like an industry can make more money that way. But we don't manage it that. We manage it maximum sustainable yield. So there are lots of ways to think about the social, cultural, economic, and environmental factors that go into managing our fisheries. And if we were to really weigh all of those and kind of think about those trade-offs, I think that we would reduce some of the pressure on our fisheries, and that would allow science to give us better information to act upon. So that's, again, a bit of a roundabout way to do it. My final addition onto this, though, is that like it is critically important that we maintain the strength of those hard lines that the science can bring in. When like we should never fish above an amount that the science says is sustainable because of the impact of that and the cost of that down the line. And so that's a legal battle that often gets fought about whether we're going to exceed an annual catch limit or whether it's occasionally okay to overfish or that sort of thing. Fisheries management is tough, but like that just costs our future generations the opportunity to fish. And it means that every time someone's making a decision, it's always easier to do something hard later than to do something hard now. And so that backbone of the law, that strength of bringing that science-based management, it gets beat up a lot, but it's critical to the success of our fisheries. And I have a lot of things in fisheries that I want to go better, but we really do have some of the best managed fisheries worldwide. Like a lot of people look at our system and envy what we've done here. And a lot of the reason for that is that strength of the science-based management system.
That I love the word backbone.
Yeah.
Because if you break the back, the body collapses.
Right.
And it's a long rebuilding even if you can. And so I think my takeaway from you is that we're close. We've had the luxury, if you will, we've had the opportunity, if you will, of some political flexibility, some political headspace, room to maneuver, where that's getting closer, less and less and less opportunity to let that flexibility. And we're now we've got a baseball bat poised around the backbone, and we have to be careful about that. And so I'm not trying to put words into your mouth. Those are my words, not yours, but that's the takeaway I got from this. And this is, I think, critically important to people who are looking at what is obviously an envious policy for fisheries management worldwide. You're absolutely right. We are the envy of the world. But that brings me to the drifting off course report of what could we be doing better? And how do
Yeah.
we do that? How do we get there? So talk to me about the report a little bit.
Yeah. So, and thank you. One of the things that we did, because it is the 50th anniversary of Magnuson, and we do want to recognize that some successes have been made, but the reason that fisheries management has been like, I think the successes we've seen in fisheries management are because we are willing to adapt and
Mhm.
change when the circumstances are changing, and because we look at some of the hard things in front of us, solve some of them, and then have to turn and look at the next set of hard things. And so what we were really trying to do here is what's the next set of hard things? Because there's no resting on our laurels here. We don't have time for that.
Yeah.
Both climate change and economic circumstances for people does not allow us to just coast right now.
Mhm.
So we have to figure out what we're going to do better. And so we looked through and we tried to identify what are some of the places where we see the most opportunity to make change, or the biggest challenges that we're facing. And some of them are about, investing more in that science-based management system. There's a lot more data that we could be collecting. There's a lot of new technologies that we could bring in. What does it look like to do that well? How do we merge them in with our current system? That, of course, has also been disrupted by the pretty devastating losses that happened about a year ago for the capacity of staff at NOAA Fisheries and NOAA. So how do we think about rebuilding those sorts of things so we can strengthen that science-based management core? Because there really isn't a way out of this without science. And so
Right.
we are going to need that. So that's one of the main things we looked at. And then we looked at some of the like core challenges that still exist. So I'm going to spend a second talking about rebuilding.
Mhm.
Because in the US, we've rebuilt 50 stocks. That's great. I don't know that anyone else has done anything quite like that. But we also have like another 50 to go. And
Mhm.
every one of those has some kind of problem with it.
Mhm.
I think, I jokingly tell people we've rebuilt all the easy stocks and now we have to deal with the hard ones.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that they're not just as important to rebuild. So in the US, a lot of times we have nothing right now that prevents you. First of all, every rebuilding plan that's put in place has a 50-50 chance of probability. So we set up rebuilding plans with a coin flip chance of being
Right.
successful. And then as we execute those for 5, 10, 20, 50 years, some of them are quite long, we don't really do an active job of understanding if those probabilities have changed. And so we can get into a rebuilding plan that we only started with a 50% probability, and then circumstances change out on the water, or the stock's not responding the way that we thought it was, or maybe something else is catching it as bycatch, or maybe there's some habitat damage we didn't know about. We don't sit there and go, are we being successful in this rebuilding plan? Do we still have at least a 50-50 chance of rebuilding? I think we should be aiming for better than that, but the effectiveness of rebuilding plans declines because we don't actively manage them. The result of not doing that is that many stocks have fully exited their rebuilding plan. So, like, you're in a 12-year rebuilding plan, you get to the end of 12 years, you've made no progress, and they just start the clock again and try again with another rebuilding plan, sometimes with literally the same approach, and the same probability of success. That means that we're leaving our fishing communities and our ecosystems impoverished that whole time.
Right.
Rather than doing what it takes to get it rebuilt and get it over with, we are just like staying in this miserable purgatory that doesn't help anybody. And that's a real challenge. The National Marine Fisheries Service did an assessment of many of their stocks that were still in rebuilding plans, and they found that, I think I might get this exact number wrong, but I'm going to be in the right ballpark, that about 2/3 of them have made no progress in rebuilding their stuff. Like, there's no biomass increase at all happening under the rebuilding plans. So we just have these like ineffective rebuilding plans that are in place. And I'm starting to see people give up Some of the more recent quote unquote rebuilt stocks that we've seen get pulled off of the rebuilding list were done so with sort of a warning from the agency. They were like, we're changing our rebuilding targets because we've decided we can't achieve rebuilding the way we thought we would. So we're going to just say, this fish isn't coming back. And we're telling you all right now that it's going to be in a very vulnerable state. And we're just going to leave it that way. So I feel like we've really lost the plot on the point of rebuilding.
Right.
And the fact that we have climate change coming in and disrupting everything makes it harder to rebuild the stocks, but it also makes it more important because we need those fish out there for the resilience capacity of those ecosystems so that they can adapt and change and move and respond together as sort of a functioning ecosystem. The ecosystems aren't going to look the same at the end of this, but like we've got to give them their best shot at being healthy on the other end. And if we're just giving up on stocks and walking away, or just leaving them in this weird purgatory forever, like that's a huge challenge. So that's one of the things. That's sort of a hobby horse of mine. We've been so successful with rebuilding, and now we're just walking away from many of these stocks, and it really sticks in my craw.
For sure. I mean, clearly that is I don't want to use the word. That's an area for improvement.
Of course, yes.
And, going forward, what's your message to those people who are looking to say, so, I mean, this is what you've just identified is fascinating to me in a very scary way, because it is like we built this wonderful law, we built this system, and now I mean, again, I don't want to harp on this point, but I'm going to bring it back up, is that you talked about our rebuilding plans have a 50-50 chance of success. And when we say, gee, we couldn't even do that, that's a challenge. That's a challenge going forward. And so what would you tell the people who look and say, okay, well, where are we going to be 10 years from now?
Yeah. I mean, first I'll say I have optimism because I haven't even gone over all of the problems we identified in our new report. All of them have workable solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So not one of them, I feel like, is unattainable for us to make progress on. We can reduce bycatch. We can improve habitat. We can improve science. We can rebuild these stocks. We can figure out how to have more people involved in the management system so that it works better for them. Like all of those things are things we can address. We can fix them. Some of it takes just political will. Some of it takes some creativity. Like it's all doable. It's all also incredibly important to address soon.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, not to just climate change everything, because there are other factors, but like the number of fishery disasters, large scale fishery disasters that have occurred is increasing, that are climate driven, and they will continue to accelerate in severity, magnitude, frequency, and all those things. Like the science tells us that we're heading for a more disrupted ocean that will have real impacts on fishing communities' ability to run a commercial business or go out fishing with your parents or whatever, or the many cultures that depend entirely on fisheries for subsistence, tribal practice, and other sorts of cultural things. Like they're all really on the front lines of many of these things. There's so many issues with access to salmon up in Alaska that are critical for us to consider. So there's a lot of concerns there. All of them have ways we can move forward. Some of them are more dramatic than others. But it's about building networks of people committed to trying to solve those problems. It's about being realistic about how we actually need to address them. It's about recognizing that doing nothing is nothing. If we keep doing the same thing that we have been doing, that's also a choice. Like that's a
Right, for
decision.
sure.
And so if we just keep on and trust that the way we've been doing things will work, we will be quickly told that that's not the case, and we will have to deal with that fallout. So there are a lot of really important things we can be doing. I want to have another 50 years of Magnuson, right? And to do that, we need to change some of the ways we're implementing the provisions of the law and figure out how to work better together and with science to do that.
But you see hope.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Again, like we can bring the right people to the table. We can make these decisions. The ocean and our fishing communities have so much capacity to change and adapt. We have to give both of them the chance to do that, but we have to have really tough conversations about what that looks like and how to get that done. And I don't know that we're having those tough conversations yet, but the change that we're facing is kind of baked in. Like we have, even if we stopped, if I'm just talking about climate change, even if we stopped emitting every bit of carbon today,
right,
we've still got 20 or 30 years of change to endure before things start getting better. So we got to start making those decisions now. But we have the roadmaps to do them. It's about making those hard choices.
Well, I like to think, thank you for that. And I like to think that the network can create that space, can create that opportunity, and that working with you and our partners on who are members of the network, and especially members of the policy council, that we can have those tough conversations and share those conversations with the people who can make those kind of decisions and impact the laws going forward. Thank you. I knew this would be an outstanding conversation. I could do this for 3 hours with you. It is just, I am so thrilled to have you as part of our policy council, Meredith, because of your experience, but also your very jovial and enthusiastic response to the future. And I look forward to continuing to work with you, and I really, really appreciate you taking the time to join this chat. And if there's anything you'd like to add to the end before we leave, here's your chance.
I think probably you've heard enough from me today. No, I had a lovely time. Thank you so much for inviting me to this. And I agree with you. I think that one of the strengths of the network, again, is bringing together those different perspectives, and that's going to be what we need to solve some of these problems. And I really am, I guess, like it's weird to say, but I am really optimistic that these things can be solved. Every choice that we make, every thing that we do, every fishery we manage a little bit better puts us on a better trajectory to the future we all want to be on. And so like every day you get up and you just try to make even one little thing a little bit better. And that has a real impact in the ecosystems and people's lives, and leaves kind of a better world for people to come after us. And I think that's really what drives me. And I think that's something that the network is absolutely helping chart the course to.
Well, we're fortunate to have you as a partner in all of this, Meredith, and I thank you. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and our next Waterside Chat is in the works, so stay tuned for that. But right now, I'm going to thank Meredith and say, until next time, thank you for joining us.
If you enjoyed this episode of Waterside Chat, share it with your friends and colleagues. You can check us out on YouTube or most podcast services. To stay up to date on Waterside Chats and the Marine Fish Conservation Network, sign up for emails at conservefish.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you at the next Waterside Chat.